people love her. You know, she is so great with an audience.
Everybody looks at her and thinks it's little vulnerable Petula. She has got chutzpah. She has tremendous drive. Nobody could survive in this business without having that.
There's no doubt that one of the great marvels is that absolutely, she keeps coming decade through decade somehow, without having to do blind date, without having to become Lulu, without having to do the facial surgery, without having to become the nostalgia act. She does manage to maintain it.
She's fantastic. She's a sexy woman. She really is.
Petula Clark arrives at Kennedy Airport, New York, with Kenny Clayton, her longtime musical director. Only the waiting limousine gives a hint of her status in America. With Downtown, Petula Clark achieved the holy grail of British pop, an American #1.
I was on tour in French-speaking Canada at the time when Downtown hit in the States. And Ed Sullivan, who was like the big guy over there, they were calling all the time. Eventually I did the Ed Sullivan show, and they start playing Downtown, and the place goes wild.
Everything's waiting for you.
Well, I think in the end it was what all great pop songs should be. In a kind of disguise, it was about sex, in a really great symbolic way. There's this sort of hint that she's a posh lady and she's going to take you downtown. And aren't you lucky that she's the one that's going to take you?
Downtown, just listen to the rhythm of a gentle bossa nova. You'll be dancing with them too before the night is over. Happy again.
When you hear Roy Orbison sing Only the Lonely, you're touched by greatness. When you hear Del Shannon sing Runaway, you've experienced something that you can't explain. Petula Clark and Downtown is one of those.
40 years on, Petula is still performing. Downtown was the song that opened doors in the 60s, and it continues to do so. But she's always maintained a kind of nonchalance as to how the song came about.
Tony Hatch, he said, I think I've got a song. He said, I haven't finished it yet. I've got the title, I've got the idea, and I've got the music. Would you like to hear it? I said, yeah, okay. I'll go in the kitchen, make the tea, and I'll listen to it through the thing. And of course, he sat down, okay. And I heard it, and I thought, whoa, I like that.
You had rock music, you had soul music just assaulting the airwaves. And at that point, Petula was identified more with the old school. And that light entertainment tradition, if you were an artist from that, you didn't have a hope in hell. You had to really change your style and adapt in order to survive.
And I came back with the tea, and I said, if you can write a lyric up to the standard of that music, I think we've got a great song.
I think she could sense that this was her way through. And it really suited her because it was, it had that soul inflection, but it was quite light. It really suited her voice.
Certain singers, if you hear them, you know exactly who it is. Vera Lynn or Edith Piaf or Judy Garland. Petula Clark falls into that category. She has a distinctive quality.
My love is warmer than the warmest sunshine, softer than a sigh.
The big sale on records is to younger people, and she had that appeal. When she came and did Don't Sleep in the Subway and Downtown and My Love and some of the other hits that she had, one right after another. And, I don't mean that only teenagers liked her. Everybody liked her.
Petula was actually the most successful of the British female singers in America. I Know a Place, My Love, they all went right into the top 5 in the US. Whereas, interestingly, the other sort of British beat girls like Dusty Springfield and Cilla Black, I mean, they had success in the States, but it wasn't quite as phenomenal.
Tony Hatch's songwriting partner, Jackie Trent, remembers the scale of the success.
There were 13 hits in a row, for goodness sake. And we thought it was like the goose that had laid the golden egg. As writers, it was unbelievable. And everybody went, well, we can't get a Clark song because you two are well in there, you know? But we were coming up with the songs that Pet wanted to record and were absolutely right for her.
Tony Hatch rescued her and gave her this extraordinary kind of iconic presence that I think distracted us from what she probably actually is as a songwriter, as a performer, as a musician, as something other than just being the sort of 60s dolly bird.
On the strength of one almighty pop classic, we've persuaded ourselves that Petula Clark is just one of the 60s girls, alongside Lulu and Cilla, Sandy and Dusty, perhaps even the least of them. But nothing could be further from the truth. Petula Clark is a whole lot more than downtown.
Afraid it's no use waiting, little girl. No room for you on the bill. Full up.
Petula's singing talent had been recognised when she was still a child and encouraged by her family.
My dad was in the army. My mother was Welsh, therefore musical. I think that's where I got my musicality from. I used to sing at the drop of a hat, really, you know. I used to love doing it. I was very shy. So when I was singing, I didn't feel so shy.
By Jove, Petula has filled the bill all by herself. Petula is a pet.
So anyway, the chance came along, of course, to do this broadcast on the BBC for the forces serving abroad, and that's the first time I sang on the air, and the reaction to that was huge.
Makes you think that heaven
By the time she was 8, Petula was a star, performing alongside Vera Lynn and the young Julie Andrews on BBC Radio and at troupe concerts all over England. 6 decades later, touring American casinos and concert halls, her childhood shows are still remembered with great affection.
I'm well. I'm lovely to see you.
At the American Red Cross Club during the Second World War, she entertained there, and we were there every night she was there. She provided a little break for us from the horrors that we were facing. This is her. She belted out a song at 11 years old that would knock you off the wall.
Spotting her appeal, Petula was signed up by the Rank Film Organization, and while her new fans were very much children of the 60s, she also connected with their parents, who remembered her as our pet.
She had been around in our lives forever. You know, my mother and father were absolute fans when she was the Huggets and everything else. And all of a sudden I thought, I am writing lyrics for Petula Clark. And it was a bit daunting, you know, but very exciting.
Jackie Trent's lyrics, they were right for Petula. They weren't cliched, they were really convincing. Petula could sing with real passion there.
Thanks to Jackie and Tony, Petula was one of the hottest properties in American entertainment. And it was not just the commercial success of working in America that was to have its impact on her career.
America was another take on show business. Very, very professional. If you have success, then you are revered and you are treated, I mean, really, they do everything but tuck you up in bed, you know.
You decide you want 25 musicians, you got them. And they're all good. You want 2 days of rehearsal, you got them. You arrive in Las Vegas, you got, they give you a house, a car, a driver, if you want, a cook, and everything, it's easy.
Maybe I'm reaching far too high.
But if, off stage, life was easy, When it came to facing an American audience, the pressure was on.
I remember going to the opening with the Copacabana in New York, and she was positively heaving. She was sick with nerves. And I thought, how does she go on and perform feeling that ill before doing a show? Because the nerves took over. As soon as she walked out in the spotlight, she was fine. She was whoosh, up and flying. And I thought, she was literally running to the loo, and and I thought, oh my God, how dreadful. But there again, that got her adrenaline going to get out there and do what she does, which is absolute perfection.
The musicality of it was very important, and I think I became a better singer in America because I was working with people who were better than me, and I was just learning from them, just being around them,
Petula's American polish was even beginning to impress British critics, who by the late 60s were putting her in the top rank.
It's almost a cliche to say that excellence needs very little dressing. The best television performance that Sinatra ever gave was the concert he gave at the Festival Hall 5 or 6 years ago. Just a man, microphone, and a small backing group. Only the very best performers can work like this, and I think that Petula Clark is of this company.
All through this process, I was having to unlearn all the silly things that I had learned as a child performer about being cute and the little tricks that kids do. I mean, they just do because it works, and I had to get rid of all of that. I didn't have a showbiz mum. I suppose I had a showbiz dad, but he wasn't really at all. I mean, a lot of things have been written about my dad were rather unkind. He was a bit stage-struck himself, I suppose. He had always wanted to be in the theatre, wanted to be an actor. He was very handsome, looked a bit like Errol Flynn, and he was never allowed to do it. So when a kid came along who had a little bit of talent, he said, I'm going to help her along.
Petula's father was, Leslie Clark, was very dominant in her life. Right up until the age of 25, she was still living with him. He chose a lot of her material. He really guided her career. He was the one that sort of steered her into the limelight as a child, and I guess saw her as a sort of British Shirley Temple, really.
It was strange, I didn't have what you might call a normal childhood because I was working and I didn't have many friends of my own age. I was working with adults in film studios. So in a way I was sort of quite grown up, and in other ways I was totally naive. I loved going to Wales. Wales was another place, another thing for me. I was really like a little wild animal when I went there. I used to go up into the mountains and sing all day and play in the streams and come back looking, as if I'd been pulled through a hedge backwards, a bit the way I look now, and happy. I love that. I love the whole Welsh sound. I love the sound of the language, and it was a more simple life. I really, really loved it. Everybody sang, and I used to sing in chapel. And I went to school there when I was about 6 and came out Welsh. Spoke Welsh. It's great. I've lost it, unfortunately. But but I can still hear it, you know, it's like, it's there inside me somewhere.
Thanks. Cheers. I was a little nervous about coming back because, you know, I know things have changed, everything changes, you know, that's life. But, you know, the people are still the same, the mountains are still the same, the stream is still here, and the rest, well, you know, the rest is really just in my memory.
But the memories of her working life are less tranquil. As the child in Rank's stable of actors, Petula was constantly busy. Her most popular role was as the youngest daughter in the Huggett family, alongside Jack Warner and Diana Dawes.
Come in. Did you want me?
Yes, I did. In future, all the time you're in my house, you're on your own smalls, you understand?
It's okay by me. They don't take long, Uncle.
And don't call me Uncle. Otherwise I might forget myself and behave as though I was. What are you looking at?
Nothing.
Despite appearances, Diana Dawes was barely a year older than Petula, who continued to be cast much younger than her actual age.
It's my mother. Crippen, your mother? Yes.
Growing up in show business at that time, there was almost a formula, you know. I had to be cute and dress a certain way and sing certain songs, and they were keeping me very, very young, so I was probably about 17 in that. Poor little thing.
Clickety-clack along the track that's taken me back to you. I've had enough, the going's rough. You're calling my bluff, I'm through.
The transition was difficult. I mean, that was the tough bit. Adolescence was not good. I don't suppose it's good for most, but it was particularly difficult for me, I think, because I was doing all my growing up in public, and you know, by then, you know, I had a television show, and you know, I was pretty well known. But I wasn't allowed to wear certain clothes, or certainly wasn't allowed to go out with boys. It was pretty well controlled, and I was pretty unhappy.
Because you've started so young, you've got so many decades ahead of you, and so much awareness that you've got so many decades ahead of you of trying to sustain this pace, this glory, this attention, you know, and the dreadful possibility of losing that attention. And it's clearly driven Petula Clark, because she didn't fight to reinvent herself. She might have just been remembered as, you know, the British Shirley Temple, this kind of strange flowering in the 40s, and whatever happened to that little girl that was in those funny little movies.
But while Shirley Temple never made the transition from child star to adult performer, and Petula was struggling, not everyone seemed to be having such a difficult time.
Julie Andrews sort of emerged about the same time. And in a way, Julie Andrews became the queen of that sort of dramatic musical role, and is taken very seriously as an actress as well as a singer. And Petula, in a way, that's where she could have gone. And she was slightly hampered, I think, by, again, maybe not very wise choices on the part of her father. He was seen as more of a hindrance after a while in the business. And she maybe didn't get the parts that she needed to at the right time.
Well, I adored my father. He could do no wrong in my eyes. But, of course, as I got older, you know what happens, you know, well, I want to do things my way and make my own mistakes and all that stuff. And I was going through that, and I would come home from the studio and not be sure if I was having dinner with my dad or with my manager, you know. And it got very difficult, emotionally very, very difficult for both of us.
Even after breaking with her father, Petula would continue to trust those closest to her with her career. Initially her pianist and boyfriend Joe Henderson, then her husband and manager Claude Wolfe. And access to this inner circle was no foregone conclusion, as Tony Hatch's new wife, Jackie Trent, would find out.
Petula was quite friendly with his ex-wife, And then Jackie came onto the scene, and it's interesting that they kept that from Petula for a little while because they weren't sure how she'd react, and they were quite right. When she did find out, she was extremely annoyed. And she didn't treat Jackie very nicely. She was quite icy with her.
Without Your Love, I wrote on the top of a number 12 bus, and I'd written the lyric as a personal lyric to me, for me, right? Of course, Claude comes steaming and, Petula is in, and we are coming in, we were in for 3 days, we need to record, and okay, what else do we have in the bag? Couldn't live without your love. And I went, okay, wear your writing hat, don't wear your performer's hat. Always wore 2 hats. 2 hats. One as a performer, one as a writer. And she had a big hit with it. And I smiled.
You wander around on your own little cloud when you don't see the why or the wherefore. You walk out on me when we both disagree, 'cause to reason is not what you care for.
But I can imagine her being quite jealous of other women. She's surrounding herself with men to an extent and allowing them into her world to create the vision she has of herself. And I guess, it's another little hint of the side of Petula Clark that we do not know, that we have not sort of been allowed, if you like, or have not bothered to really understand, that she's a lot more dynamic and powerful and what would the word be, edgy, if you like, than the little cartoon we have of her in our heads.
The cartoon Petula was a hangover, not just from her childhood and teenage years, but from the 50s, when she was making hit records, but in an entirely different style.
Women in the 50s, really, in Britain particularly, tended to sing more sort of novelty tunes or light ballads. Nothing too taxing. It was strictly sort of family entertainment, quite popular. Artists like Dusty Springfield at that time was in the Lana Sisters, and they were doing really sweet little novelty things like 7 Little Girls in the Backseat. And Petula fitted in with that tradition at that time. Your women artists weren't expected to be too racy.
It's all right, but could it be a bit quicker?
What, in tempo?
Try in tempo, yes. Have I told you lately that I love you? Oh, yes, that's better.
They were all sort of themed songs. It was the little waists and the full skirts. We'd all call very, very twee. Pet wasn't like that at all. I think there was a very, very impressionable woman. I think there was a very passionate woman inside her that wanted to get out.
Petula's chance to break out came when her French record company asked her to perform in Paris, with a view to persuading her to record in French.
They kept calling and calling. So eventually I said, okay, I'll come over. It's just for one night. And little did I know that it was at the Olympia, which, of course, was the Mecca of show business in France. And Europe #1 was the radio station. I sang 3 songs in English, couldn't even say bonsoir, in front of a huge French audience in the Olympia Theatre. And they loved it. And I, to this day, will never understand why they loved it.
In France, they really warmed to her. I think they saw her as a sort of English Rose, and they loved the fact that she sang French with a really strong English accent. And I think they quite liked the fact that she didn't have much style. I mean, French women are so chic, and yet she would... What was it her husband Claude said when he first met her? He wasn't that impressed because she was singing, she was wearing a dress that looked like 2 large pink lampshades. But they still warmed to her.
Despite the success of the evening, Petula had little enthusiasm for recording and performing in France, until the lights went out.
She came to the office the day after, And I was a PR at the time. And the boss called me at one point because his lamp broke down. And I was the only tall guy and who could fix it up, was ready to change. Then I jump on the desk, change it.
And I look up at this guy, cet homme, you know. I said, who's that? Who's that? He said, he's our PR man. And if you did decide to do a record, you know, he would be taking you around Paris and helping you out with the interviews and television and radio and journalists. I said, okay, well, maybe I'll have a little try, you know.
She became a big star there in France, and I think she really absorbed that chanson tradition and was hanging out with people like Sacha Distel and Charles Aznavour, and again, very light entertainment, but there was quite a lot of depth to it because of that chanson tradition and the whole ballad format that Edith Piaf had set up. And I think Petula learnt a lot there, and you can hear those influences in her singing, and I think that gave extra depth to her singing.
Quand je m'éveille, tout mon soleil, tous mes merveilles dans le jour nouveau. Oh, 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 oh. Baby love.
The wonderful thing about the success that I was having in France was it had nothing to do with my childhood. It had nothing to do with my background. They just liked me the way I was, and that was important to me. I could leave my luggage behind me, you know.
I'll give you 3-4 into this, you remember, guys? 3 and 4 in.
Petula still works with her musical director from those early French tours, Kenny Clayton.
And they said, right, the musicians go in the Citroën estate car, because it'll take the bass, the drums, and the 3 musicians. And we'll see you in Lyon. But on the way into Lyon, I'm with Pet's image on it, saying, Petula, Palais d'Hiver, Lyon, ce soir. But this, I mean, I'd never seen posters this size. I thought, my God, this is good publicity. And I didn't know what the Palais d'Hiver was. Well, it's an arena, and it holds 5,000 people, and it was packed, and they were jumping down, up and down, like a football crowd for Petula. And I was just amazed by the whole thing.
I was learning about another kind of show business, because for a long time, for me anyway, in England, it was all about, you know, wearing a big frock, singing with a jolly song and finishing with a great big ballad and not getting too involved, really, in any of it. And in France, I was seeing something else. I mean, the first time I saw Piaf, she kind of stumbled onto the stage in her funny little black dress, which was not chic at all, and she looked ill. And it was a black stage, no fancy tra-la-las at all, no special effects. I thought, well, this is, I don't know if I'm going to enjoy this much, you know. And she started to sing. And it was all about what she had inside her. And she could sing about anything, life, death, madness, sex, you name it. It was all in her songs.
Mon histoire, c'est l'histoire d'un amour. Ma complainte, c'est la plainte de 2 cœurs. Un roman comme tant d'autres qui pourrait être le vôtre, gens d'ici ou bien d'ailleurs.
And she wasn't the only one. There were many other singers of that kind around, and it was quite a revelation, really.
Pour toi, pour moi, l'amour.
She is an actress. I think probably she's an actress first and foremost, you know. And I think the box of pop star that we put people in those days was probably too tighter box for her, too tight a fit for her. And I think to go over there's a lot more freedom for her over there. And the French chanson, the Jacques Brel, the things she used to sing over there, I think possibly brought out the actor in her more than the uniform of a pop personality over here.
Well, je l'ai connu la la en twistant le ya ya.
In 1961, Petula and Claude were married in Paris in a frenzy of media and fan attention. Ya Ya Twist went to #1 in France, and though it made the British charts too, a second wedding here was an altogether quieter affair.
Well, you know, I married a Frenchman, so everybody thought that was naughty. Particularly the English, you know. Our little pet, you know, she's gone off to marry a foreigner, a Frenchman, you know. Well, we had 2 children quite quickly, and my career was really pretty extraordinary in France. I was voted their top singer, and I was also making hit records in Italy and Germany. It was wonderful. I was doing all my growing up, really, in Paris.
It is a great pleasure to welcome to our program Miss Petula Clark.
Back in the UK, we might have had trouble seeing Petula's French adventures for more than their novelty value.
La pendule fait tic-tac, tic-tic. Les oiseaux du lac pic-tac, pic-pic.
But our pet had definitely moved on.
Et la petite cloche.
She did look a lot more chic, and she became very international, really. She was able to sort of project that famous poise, and that really helped her when she broke through into America.
My funny Valentine, sweet comic Valentine, you make me smile with my heart.
When I first met her, when we first worked together, you know, in the 60s, and she did my television show and I did a special of hers. She is such a great performer. People would come to see her expecting to hear Downtown and the other songs that they knew of hers. And they got so much more. And they got, a woman who knew how to perform, who had done theater, who knew how to act, who knew how to handle an audience. She's just terrific.
Visions of sugar plums race through my head. You and I drinking yesterday's wine.
Well, I think there's much too much emphasis on, you can't complain, I mean, it's given her a wonderful lifestyle, and there's much too much emphasis on Downtown, and I Know a Place, which are, by the way, great songs, and indelibly stamped with her no matter who else tries to do them. And there's too little emphasis on her wide range of talent. I mean, there isn't anything she can't sing.
I'm in with the in crowd. I go where the in crowd goes. I'm in with the in crowd, and I know what the in crowd knows.
In demand for TV shows and concerts, not just in Britain but in Europe and America as well, Petula was that rarest of British commodities, an international superstar. And with 2 young children, Bara and Kate, it can't have been easy to fit it all in.
I think it must have been terribly difficult for her to have the 2 daughters, Kate and Bara. They were moving from the lycée in Paris to the lycée in Los Angeles, New York. They were all over the place. And it must have been terribly difficult because you're uprooting all the time. And I know her sister travelled with them quite a lot so she could be there for the girls, you know. Yes, she took a lot on. She took a heck of a lot on.
My work in America, I think, was really good for me, although it was complicating my life, if you like, you know, the constant travelling. And I would finish a season in, I don't know, Vegas and Los Angeles and wherever I was, in Chicago, and instead of hanging out and having fun with it, I would get on a plane, you know, and go back. So it was not totally satisfactory.
Life is never what it seems. We're always searching in our dreams to find that little castle in the air.
In one way, it's a comfortable life because you make money. In the other end, they don't have a real mother like other children. Some, maybe Bara will suffer a little bit of it. Kate, I don't know. We tried at the time to do like you do Las Vegas or Reno or Tahoe, to do that during Easter or summer holiday or Christmas to take them with us. But we've done our best. They have to make their own life. Well, now they're old enough anyway to.
Look, look, look to the rainbow.
At the height of her pop career, Petula starred in 2 films, Finian's Rainbow with Fred Astaire and Goodbye Mr. Chips with Peter O'Toole, but neither revived the success of her earlier film career.
A couple of odd movies in a way. The kind of movies you would put a sort of pop star, ex-pop star in anyway, not necessarily because she was an actress, you know. In the Huggett movies, she was brilliant, actually. I mean, you couldn't see the join. You know, she was in it, she was of it, and she was something. And who knows what would have happened in a way if that had continued. And she'd found a way to grow up as a film actress, if you like, and actually make films.
From child star to movie star, through her rise as a singer during the 50s and her reinvention as a pop star, Petula's career had soared. The stumbling of her film career was the first hint of trouble ahead.
The 70s was a very difficult time for 60s artists. On the whole, they were seen as old hat, and there was a whole raft of new bands, and really the 70s was a lot more about bands, like big supergroups like Led Zeppelin or the Eagles, and then in the late 70s it was punk, and then obviously at that point everyone tore up the rule book.
We're so pretty, oh, so pretty. We're vacant, oh, we're so pretty, oh, so pretty. Oh, vacant. You wander around on your own little cloud.
I think Petula handled the transition from the 60s to the 70s very well. And the main reason she did that was because she embraced that international market. She could do clubs, she could do cabaret, she could do pop, and she did it all with this real charm, and she moved very easily from within different circles, whether it was Frank Sinatra at Vegas or a more hip sort of Motown crowd. She could move very easily between all those places.
I've heard it more than a million times before. My love is warmer than the warmest sunshine, softer than a sigh.
One of my favourites. All the Tony Hatch, Jackie Trent songs. Tonight it's for you.
You're the only one that I rely on.
Petula reworked her back catalogue for the middle of the road, but the artist in her wanted more.
Okay, she was doing this cabaret thing, but also she was exploring her own artistic depth with the albums Memphis and Blue Lady, which she recorded in Nashville in '75. And she was working with Chips Moman, who's a wonderful producer, songwriter, who's worked with everyone from Elvis Presley to Bobby Womack to Aretha Franklin. Lovely guy, and a real enabler.
I wanna see morning with him. I wanna see morning with him. No, I'm not made of stone.
You got the feeling this was at the heart of what she really wanted to do, you know. Sing great songs, you know, from a female point of view about disappointment and defiance, sing them beautifully, not necessarily have hits as such, but sort of, you know, have album hits, I guess, you know, and join in a world where, you know, there was Joni Mitchell, there was Carole King, there was James Taylor. Oddly enough, I think there was a little glimpse of the possibility that Petula Clark could have done that.
The road was crowded when I walked in.
Petula also recorded with Arif Mardin, who 30 years later would be responsible for producing Norah Jones' 20 million selling album, Come Away With Me.
Welcome, not a trace. I felt so out of place. And then I saw your lovely face.
You know, it's 30 odd years ago, but you know, you think of it now as a template for the Norah Jones album, you know, that kind of strange way of putting an unclassifiable female voice with this wonderful mixture of jazz and country and blues and rock, and that album, actually the Arif Mardin one, does stand up and therefore is a kind of lost masterpiece.
There's a new maturity there, and it's an area that really I think she could have explored a bit more, because I think it got to her that she couldn't really find her own intrinsic musical style, and I think it was probably there.
If she'd stuck in that groove for a little while, maybe we would have trusted that, if you like, but she got restless that it wasn't taken and kept moving about. By the mid-70s, she'd almost become just singing covers, just singing the hits of the day, and again, really fantastically. You know, the only thing that dates them in a way is the sound of them, not the way she sings them. And I suppose by the mid-70s, you know, she'd run into the final cul-de-sac. The reinvention she was doing, no one was really noticing at all.
Eventually, the struggle to combine her creative interests with her more commercial work and her family life began to take its toll.
I was feeling really torn apart, so I stopped. I stopped for a couple of years. Which was a very strange experience. Just not performing at all, really. And by then, of course, we had 3 children. Lovely Patrick had been born in Geneva. And I thought, well, okay. But, you know, there was something missing from my life.
I don't know how to love to do, how to move him.
Before the 70s were out, Petula was back on stage and staking her claim to a new kind of performance. When she took on the role of Maria in the stage version of The Sound of Music, the critics muttered. They needn't have worried. The show ran for over a year in the West End, and Petula had found herself another career.
Very good move, actually, because there was a big revival of the musical in the 80s. It's a whole other circuit now, and it's enormous. And I think it is the place to go for a lot of older artists or pop artists who have maybe grown out of that young audience and are not quite sure where to go, but don't want to go somewhere too left field or too startling.
Entering into the world of the musicals, to give yourself the 80s, to give yourself the 90s. That takes a kind of courage in a way, and a kind of, you know, having to force yourself to deaden part of yourself to keep the career going.
And it certainly did keep going. After the success of The Sound of Music, Petula was called upon to rescue a show in dire straits.
It was a bomb. And it was not just a critical disaster, it was a financial disaster.
I remember my lawyer in New York said, Claude, you're taking a big risk because this show doesn't work. I said, look, you have 2 ways to look at it. I'm looking that way. The show doesn't work. If Petula goes in it and doesn't work, we will say the show is bad. And if the show works, it's because of her. And he said, well, you're taking a risk, and he worked very well.
I had never done Broadway before. The idea of going into a show which was in trouble was kind of exciting. I kind of liked that, the challenge.
Producer Bill Kenwright was making frightening losses on Broadway with Willie Russell's Blood Brothers and facing eviction from the theatre.
Gerald Schoenfeld, who is the godfather of New York theatre, owned the theatre we were in, came to see me and gave me notice. And he said, we have Stacy Keach coming in Kentucky Cycle or something. And I said, I'm going nowhere. He said, what are you talking about? And we were in my London office. I said, I'm going nowhere. He said, what do you mean you're going nowhere? I'm giving you no. I said, no, you're not. Because I've got, and I sort of looked up there, and I heard myself saying, I've got David Cassidy and Petula Clark taking over. And he went, have you really? I said, yep. I didn't have David Cassidy and Petula Clark. And he went and phoned his head office and said, Bill's got David Cassidy and Petula Clark. Oh, well, that's a different... So we shook hands, and I thought, how do I get hold of David Cassidy and Petula Clark?
Playing a mother destined to see the tragic death of her twin sons, Petula, alongside David and Sean Cassidy, defied the critics. Against all odds, they turned round the fortunes of the show.
It was actually called The Miracle of Broadway. So she, and David, I have to say, but she gave Willie Russell and myself just dreams come true time.
First of all, she loves what she does. And she loves people around her. She just makes you feel comfortable, you know, and sometimes you feel like you're not doing your job. You think like she's taking care of everybody.
Though still very involved in each other's lives, Petula and Claude had grown apart. By 1995, she was free to tour America with Blood Brothers for 9 months.
When you have someone as experienced and as professional and as talented as Petula Clark, you can throw the ball and know that it's going to be caught and tossed back to you. That's a trust and a comfort as an actor that this is why I do it, you know, to have experience like that.
Won't you tell me that it's not true? Say you didn't mean it.
She shows you her loneliness, she shows you her truth and her honesty with such a bravery. And she's saying, tell me it's not true, say you only dreamed it, and those 2 boys are in front. You believed that was their mother, and your heart just snapped.
Now, you want to take it from the top? Sure. Why don't you sing this verse? I always think of Petula, aside from the extraordinary voice, of her ability to write. I mean, not only is she a great writer, writes great songs, but she is so prolific that at one point during the 60s, her husband Claude was able to come up with 2 separate contracts for her as a songwriter, one under a pseudonym of all people, Al Grant was the name he chose, and the other as herself. And so in addition to everything else, she made 2 very good incomes as a songwriter.
Despite the financial advantages of writing her own material, the creative possibilities of Petula the songwriter went unrecognized and unpromoted. Heart, co-written by Petula, was never released as an A-side.
Petula did write her own songs, but that was an area that never really got developed, along with her more artistic side. And I sort of feel that was something that was discouraged. Female singers, oh, well, that's not really your strength. You know, songwriting's not your strength. You just will compose and you sing. And I think she internalized that quite a lot. If she'd been born, 20 years later, she might have been like Carole King, writing her own songs and really creating a new sound.
Tragedy's not my bag, but it looks like it has found me. blue lady.
None of Petula and Claude's 3 children has chosen to follow them into the music business, though Kate, their middle daughter, is a visual artist with her own take on her mother's career.
I think I'm probably not your personal taste.
Oh no, no, that's not true. I mean, there's actually some albums, or some songs anyway, that I really like. And I love your voice, that's for sure. I think you have a really beautiful voice. Now, all the songs, of course, are not the songs maybe that I love to listen to, but some of them, I even got some CDs here. Sometimes when I work, I feel like listening to your voice. I listen to a couple of songs.
Whoa.
Scary, yeah? I like the Blue Lady album.
Oh, the Blue Lady album, yes, that's the one we did in Nashville.
Nashville, yeah, I love that one.
Yes, there's something about the Nashville and the Memphis albums that they have a certain sound to them that, I don't know, it's a little bit strange, and I like that. I would have liked to have done more of that kind of thing.
It's really, I like that.
It's midnight. Do you know where your baby is?
Blue Lady was recorded in 1975 with a title song written by Petula. Like Memphis from earlier in the decade, it was produced by Chips Moman, one of American music's finest producers. Yet despite the quality of the lineup and of the songs recorded, it lay gathering dust for 20 years.
It's odd to think of Petula Clark being dangerous, but in a record company world in the early 70s, definitely dangerous. And the idea of making a country album, I can imagine that it drifted off into the margins and sort of got held on the shelves, because it was oddly almost an experimental album. And in a way, you think of that period of Petula Clark as being the experimental years, you know, her trying to find a new formula, if you like, that was comfortable for her as an artist, but also sustained her economic reason for being, you know, for the record companies and the managers and the producers.
The whispered conversation.
The Moneymen had taken fright, but Petula had proved her bankability in musicals. Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber and Sir Trevor Nunn asked her to take on the role of Norma Desmond, the washed-up silent movie star of Sunset Boulevard. She delivered a West End hit, a 2-year American tour, and a triumphant concert performance opposite Michael Ball.
When you're that close to an actress and a great singer, and you see in their eyes the belief in what they're doing. She became Norma Desmond. It was quite terrifying. And when she did the mad scenes at the end, it was so convincing. I sort of went, oh my God, has she gone off on one? And then we finished rehearsing the scene and back to regular Petula. It was great, a great experience.
I really went into that reluctantly. I was scared. It is a very, very frightening thing to do. I've always been a nice lady, you know, in everything I've done. You know, Sound of Music, Blood Brothers, the R thing, you know, R. You know. There's no R in this at all. I mean, she is weird.
It would be very easy to stand on a stage and make a pleasant noise, but that doesn't engage an audience. You have to have something else. You have to be able to share something of yourself, and that's what she does. She shares something of herself.
I've spent so many mornings just trying to resist you.
Well, I finished up loving the younger Norma Desmond, the one that we never saw, because she'd become this crusty, difficult, bitter woman because she had lost all that youth and beauty and fame. Instead of playing it hard and, you know, that kind of mad, sort of nasty, I played her like a young woman, and it was. It's the only time in the show where we had a glimpse of what she might have been like before. And I found that very moving. And I have to say, by the time I'd finished playing her for 2 years, which is a long time, I felt very differently about her. I actually sort of loved her. and missed her when I wasn't playing her anymore.
I'm hanging on such a drag. All this sitting around and moping.
You think of Garland and you think of Temple, and you think of both of them self-destructing in a way. Temple evolving into something, but not to do with show business, not to do with entertainment, making really a decision to get out of that. Garland staying in entertainment and completely destroying herself by, you know, having to face up to those problems of loss of reputation, loss of nerve, loss of voice, loss of material, loss of audience, all those things that Petula Clark has faced up to and somehow kind of pierced and penetrated and kept going.
If you look at somebody's career and say, you've been there, you've done that, and my God, has she ever, and done it in the best possible way, she's unique. She's totally and utterly unique, and you cannot take that away from her. We may have not got on well at the very beginning, but I admire her tremendously.
Admired she may be, but after a 60-year career in which she's wiped the floor with the competition, shouldn't there be more? Audiences who never saw the 60s know Scylla and Lulu. Critics rate Sandy and revere Dusty. But where's Petula in the roll call?
I think her story is, of all those, oddly enough, the most interesting. It might have ended up being the most complicated, which is why we've had difficulty dealing with it. You know, the Lulu one is 2 or 3 moves. The Scylla one is the big blind date move. You know, the Sandy Shaw move is a little bit of the Smiths in the 80s. But she's probably a better singer than all of them. Her, you know, ability to interpret a song is better than any of them. She was around for a lot longer than they were before. She's done a lot more interesting things in her way after. She's made better albums as works of art than any of them. Petula's almost too complicated, really, to fit into the nice, comfortable boxes that making the canon has ended up being. She became too restless, and we just, you know, haven't been able to deal with that.
All right. How are you? Hello, darling.
And Petula in her 70s is no different.
If something, you know, out of left field came along that I fancied doing, sure, I'd do it. It's fun. It's got to be fun for me. It's got to feel, yeah, you know. So what next?